All right, buckle up everyone, because we are about to embark on a deep dive into Western philosophy.
That's right.
61 episodes to unravel some of history's biggest brain ticklers, and I promise you won't want to miss a single one.
Absolutely.
So to kick things off, we're starting with Protagoras,
Ooh, Protagoras.
a figure so ahead of his time that his ideas still resonate centuries later.
Yeah, what's fascinating is how relevant his ideas are even today, Protagoras really makes you question how we form our own truth, something that's it's constantly at play in our modern world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So to guide us on this journey, we've got episode 10, Protagoras.
Of course.
And we'll be referencing Bertrand Russell's classic A History of Western Philosophy to add some extra historical context.
Always a good idea.
Think of this deep dive as a crash course in critical thinking, Protagoras style. Now imagine you're in ancient Greece.
Okay.
Sparta's iron grip on power is loosening, and Athens, fueled by trade and new ideas, is on the rise.
This shift from military might to the power of ideas is crucial to understanding Protagoras.
Yeah.
As Russell points out, this era saw a real questioning of traditional values, almost like society itself was going through an existential crisis.
And who steps into this whirlwind of change?
Well.
Protagoras, one of the sophists.
Uh-huh.
These were teachers who specialized in rhetoric and argumentation.
Yeah, think of them like the ultimate debate coaches. They were preparing students for success in a society where persuasion and eloquence were highly valued.
And Protagoras, he drops this bombshell. Man is the measure of all things.
Right.
I mean, that's a statement that's both simple and mind-bogglingly complex at the same time.
Yeah, on the surface, it sounds straightforward, but the implications are profound.
Okay.
It throws the whole concept of objective truth into question. Suddenly, it's not about some universal standard. It's about individual perception.
Hold on, I'm already feeling a little lost.
Okay.
So if I see the world one way and you see it differently, we're both right.
That's the essence of Protagoras' idea.
Right.
It's a radical shift from believing in a single absolute truth to embracing the idea that truth is relative to the individual. Imagine the implications.
Okay, that makes my head spin a bit.
Really?
If there's no absolute truth, how do we make decisions? How do we know what to believe?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a question that continues to resonate even today.
Right.
Think about all the disagreements we have,
Sure.
whether it's politics, religion, or even just deciding what movie to watch. Protagoras forces us to acknowledge that our perspective isn't the only one, and that what we consider true might be different for someone else.
It's almost like he's laying the groundwork for understanding different viewpoints, which is something we grapple with constantly in our modern world. So, in a way, Protagoras is giving us tools to navigate a world overflowing with information and opinions.
Exactly. And it's not about saying anything goes. Remember, the sophists, including Protagoras, were masters of argumentation. They believed in the power of reason and persuasion, even if they questioned the existence of a single absolute truth.
So it's not about blindly accepting whatever anyone says.
No.
It's about understanding how they arrived at their truths.
Right.
And being able to articulate your own perspective effectively. That's a skill that's valuable no matter what age you are.
Absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting. Protagoras' ideas, as radical as they were, didn't exist in a vacuum. They had a huge impact on subsequent thinkers, especially Plato. Now, Plato wasn't exactly a fan of Protagoras' relativism.
Okay.
He saw it as potentially dangerous and spent a good chunk of his career arguing against it.
Wait, so Plato actually wrote about Protagoras?
He did. In fact, Protagoras pops up in 2 of Plato's dialogues, Protagoras and Theaetetus.
Wow.
It's fascinating to see how the Plato grapples with these ideas, and we'll definitely dive deeper into that debate in future episodes.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. It sounds like Protagoras is like a philosophical lightning rod, sparking debates, challenging assumptions, even centuries after his time.
And that's exactly why he's such a perfect starting point for our philosophical journey. Protagoras, with his simple yet profound statement, "Man is the measure of all things," opens up a whole world of questions about truth, perception, and how we understand the world around us.
So are we saying that there's no such thing as right and wrong?
That's where things get complex. Protagoras' ideas are often labeled as relativism,
Okay.
which is a fancy way of saying that truth is dependent on the individual or context. This challenges the idea of objectivism, which argues for universal truths that exist independently of our perception.
I'm starting to see how this could get messy.
Yeah.
If everyone has their own truth, how do we ever agree on anything?
That's a challenge for sure. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a closer look at what episode 10 Protagoras specifically tells us about his ideas. This will help us unpack his arguments in more detail and understand how they fit into the brighter philosophical landscape.
That sounds like a plan. I'm ready to dive deeper into the mind of Protagoras and see what else he has to teach us.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's crack open this episode 10, Protagoras, and see what kind of gems we can unearth. It feels like we're about to decode some ancient wisdom, kind of like Indiana Jones with a scroll instead of a whip.
I love that analogy. And speaking of decoding, this episode really digs into Protagoras' skepticism about our senses.
Okay.
It's a point that Russell also highlights, and it's key to understanding how Protagoras arrived at his man is the measure idea.
Right. Okay. Remind me about this sensory skepticism thing again. It's been a while since my philosophy 101 days.
Essentially, Protagoras noticed how easily our senses can be tricked. Think about optical illusions.
Huh?
What you see isn't always what's actually there, right?
Yeah, those things can really mess with your mind. Like that dress that went viral a few years back. Was it blue and black or white and gold? Everyone saw it differently.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of how perception can vary from person to person. And Protagoras seems to have been fascinated by this idea that our senses, which we rely on to understand the world, aren't always reliable.
So if we can't trust our senses to give us an accurate picture of reality, how can we be sure of anything? It's like that whole foundation of knowledge starts to crumble.
Precisely. And this is where episode 10 gets really insightful. It suggests that Protagoras saw this sensory uncertainty as a springboard for his theory of relativism. If our perception is subjective, then our understanding of truth must be subjective too.
Okay, I'm starting to follow. So it's like he's saying, hey, if we can't even agree on what color a dress is, how can we claim to know any absolute truths about the universe?
Right. And this is where the man is the measure idea comes in.
Okay.
If truth is relative to the individual, then each person becomes the arbiter of what's true for them.
But wait a minute. Doesn't that mean anyone can believe anything they want, even if it's totally illogical or harmful?
That's a common criticism of relativism, and it's a point that episode 10 addresses directly. Protagoras wasn't advocating for a free-for-all, where reason goes out the window.
So it's not like he's saying, believe whatever you want, facts don't matter.
Not at all. Remember, Protagoras was a sophist.
Right.
These were people who valued argumentation and persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
They believed in the power of reason and logic, even if they questioned the existence of objective truth.
So it's more about recognizing that different perspectives exist.
Yeah.
And being able to engage with those perspectives in a thoughtful way.
Exactly. Episode 10 actually emphasizes this point. It argues that Protagoras, despite his skepticism, still believed in the importance of reasoned discourse. He just thought the goal of debate shouldn't be to find one right answer, but to understand different viewpoints and articulate your own perspective effectively.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's like he's shifting the focus from finding the truth to understanding how people arrive at their own truths.
And that's a skill that's incredibly valuable in our own lives, wouldn't you say? Think about how much conflict arises from people assuming they have the only correct perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in today's world where everyone has a platform to share their opinions, whether they're well-reasoned or not. Maybe Protagoras was onto something with this whole man is the measure idea.
Perhaps he was. And it's not just about avoiding conflict. It's about being able to learn from people who see the world differently than we do. If we shut down opposing viewpoints, we miss out on the opportunity to expand our understanding and maybe even challenge our own assumptions.
So Protagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher, might actually be a secret weapon for navigating the complexities of the 21st century. I'm starting to think this guy was way ahead of his time.
He certainly was a trailblazer. But before we crown him as the ultimate champion of open-mindedness, we need to consider some of the potential downsides of his relativistic worldview.
Ooh, I knew there had to be a catch. What are we missing?
Well, if we take man is the measure to its extreme, we might end up in a situation where all beliefs are considered equal, regardless of their basis in reality.
I see where you're going with this. If my truth is just as valid as yours, even as mine is based on conspiracy theories and yours is based on scientific evidence, that's a problem, right?
Exactly. That's one of the biggest critiques of relativism. It can create a slippery slope where truth becomes entirely subjective and we lose sight of shared realities.
So how do we reconcile Protagoras' emphasis on individual perception with the need for some kind of shared understanding of the world?
That's a question philosophers have been grappling with for centuries, and it's something we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into the history of Western thought.
Okay, I'm sensing a cliffhanger here. But before we get too lost in the philosophical weeds, let's take a step back and remember that this is just part 2 of our epic 61-part journey.
Right. We've laid the groundwork with Protagoras, and now we have a whole pantheon of fascinating thinkers waiting to be explored.
And I can't wait to see how their ideas build upon, challenge, and maybe even completely contradict what we've learned so far.
Yeah.
It's like we're embarking on a grand intellectual adventure, and I'm already hooked. Okay, so we got this tension, right, between individual truth
Yeah.
and then the need for some sort of like shared reality.
Right.
Like Protagoras, he tossed this philosophical grenade into the room,
Yeah.
and we're still like sorting out the fallout.
A very apt analogy. And that's the beauty of philosophy, isn't it? It's not about finding easy answers,
Right.
but about wrestling with these complex questions that have no, clear-cut solutions.
Yeah, no, it definitely keeps the brain cells firing. But I have to admit, I'm still struggling with this idea that there might not be one definitive truth. Does that mean we're all just like living in our own little bubbles, completely detached from any kind of shared reality?
That's where things get nuanced. Protagoras, while emphasizing, individual perception, didn't necessarily deny the existence of a shared reality. He just questioned whether we could ever have a completely objective understanding of that reality.
Okay, so it's not that there's no shared reality.
Right.
It's just that our individual perceptions kind of color how we experience and interpret that reality.
Yeah.
Kind of like looking at the world through different colored lenses,
That's a great way to put it. And this is where episode 10 offers some really valuable insights.
Okay.
It suggests that Protagoras, while acknowledging the subjectivity of perception, still believed in the possibility of finding common ground through dialogue and debate.
So even though we might see the world differently, we can still talk to each other, share our perspectives, and maybe even come to some kind of understanding.
Precisely. Protagoras, remember, was a master of rhetoric. He believed in the power of persuasion, not through force or dogma, but through reasoned argumentation.
So it's not about like correct answer. It's about being willing to listen,
Yeah.
engage with different perspectives, and maybe even adjust our own views based on what we learn.
Exactly.
Oh.
And that's a skill that's so crucial in today's world, which is, increasingly interconnected and filled with diverse viewpoints.
Yeah.
It's like Protagoras is giving us a blueprint for navigating these complexities and finding ways to bridge the divides that separate us.
Yeah, it's almost like he's saying, hey, let's agree to disagree,
Right.
but let's do it in a way that's respectful,
Yeah.
thoughtful, and maybe even helps us all learn something new along the way.
I love that. And it highlights the importance of critical thinking, a
Right.
skill that Protagoras and the Sophists really championed.
Yeah.
It's about being able to analyze information,
Uh-huh.
evaluate different perspectives, and form your own conclusions based on evidence and reason.
So even though Protagoras might have made us question the very nature of truth, he also gave us tools to navigate a world where truth is often elusive
Yeah.
and contested. It's like he's saying, hey, it's okay to be uncertain, just be thoughtful about it.
Well said. And that's a message that resonates across generations, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Whether you're a teenager just starting to grapple with these big questions or
Right.
someone with, decades of life experience, Protagoras' ideas invite us to engage in a lifelong process of learning and critical reflection.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the mind of Protagoras.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today. From ancient Greece to modern-day dilemmas,
Yeah.
we've explored his groundbreaking ideas about perception, truth, and the power of reasoned debate.
And we've only just scratched the surface. This deep dive into Protagoras is just the first step in our grand philosophical adventure. We have 60 more episodes to uncover the wisdom of history's greatest thinkers, each offering their unique perspective on the universe and our place within it.
So if you enjoyed this journey back in time with Protagoras, buckle up, because we're just getting started. We've got a whole lineup of fascinating philosophers waiting in the wings, ready to challenge your assumptions, expand your horizons, and maybe even make you question everything you thought you knew.
Until then, keep those minds open, those questions flowing, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.